The pharynx is the next part, or the throat, and this is a common passageway for solid food, fluids, and of course air. So air moves through our nose and our mouth down through the pharynx down into the lungs. But it's a common passageway, as it said, which is shared with the digestive system. And it's very important that you have a good knowledge of this so that you can protect your patient's airway from any food going down the trachea. The pharynx is divided into three areas. We have the nasopharynx, the oropharynx, and the laryngopharynx. You can have a look in a diagram in your book. And food passes through the oropharynx and the laryngopharynx down into the esophagus. The esophagus is really a tube that connects the oral cavity to the stomach. So it's about 25 centimeters in length and about 2 centimeters wide, and it conveys the solid food and liquids to the stomach. And it begins with the posterior to the cricoid cartilage. Now, the cricoid cartilage we'll talk about later in protecting a person's airway when they are having an anaesthetic. So we know that for people who come in for planned elective surgery, they will be fasted for 6 to 8 hours. But in emergency surgery, some, of course, patients may come in unconscious. We don't know if they've got a stomach full of food. So if we do have to intubate them, if the anaesthetist does have to pass a tube through their mouth or nose down into their lungs in order to put them onto a machine for breathing, it's important that we protect the trachea so that food doesn't regurgitate up from the stomach and then pass down into the trachea. So we do that by what is called putting cricoid pressure on it during the process of intubation, but we'll talk about that a bit later. And then we have the esophagus. It enters the abdominal pelvic cavity through the esophageal hiatus, and it's innervated by the fibers of the esophageal plexus. So it has resting muscular tone, and it also has 3 layers: the mucosal, the submucosal, and the muscularis. Very similar to the first diagram that we showed you of the digestive system. So 3 layers: the mucosal, the one underneath it, submucosal, and then the muscularis. Here we have a cross-section of the esophagus. You can see that it is quite soft, and because there's nothing moving through it, it is collapsed down. So this is a transverse section through an empty esophagus, no food moving through it. Swallowing is also known as deglutition. Oh, I can't even say it. Have a go. Deglutition. And it can be initiated voluntarily. So we voluntarily swallow. It proceeds automatically, and it's divided into 3 phases: the buccal phase in the mouth, the pharyngeal phase, and the esophageal phase as it moves down towards the stomach. Here we have the buccal phase, the diagram showing you what we'll call the bolus, or the food, moving through the buccal phase, moving through the mouth. The tongue rises up, sits against the hard palate, forces what we've got in our mouth down the epiglottis. You can see there, and you can see quite clearly the trachea. The epiglottis moves down, covers the entrance to the trachea so that the food moves past the trachea down the esophagus. You can see in Phase 2, quite clearly, the movement from the top picture where the epiglottis is raised up to the epiglottis closing over the trachea. And then via peristalsis, it moves down through the esophagus down to the lower esophageal sphincter and into the stomach. So I'm just going to skip through these because I've spoken about these